You could argue that DeMar DeRozan was one of the greatest Bulls free agency signings in their franchise's history, which maybe isn't really saying that much since the Bulls have never really been known for their stellar free agency pickups despite being in one of the biggest markets in the league and being a global brand with millions of fans. But DeMar DeRozan, despite some of his flaws, the perception that he doesn't fit well in today's NBA with his style of play of being a half-court, heavy isolation, mid-range player, DeMar was everything you want to see in representing the city of Chicago with his professionalism on and off the court, his veteran leadership, how he carried himself despite the team's struggles, and of course, just a killer on the court in the fourth quarter. And while we're seeing DeMar doing all these interviews recently to promote his book Above the Noise, whether it be on players' podcasts or on First Take, we're finally starting to hear from DeMar and opening up a bit about his tenure in Chicago, how free agency went down this summer, and his path forward with the Sacramento Kings. And it made me realize, and really this should be for all Bulls fans for that matter, how much we are going to miss having this guy on the roster. Yes, it needed to be done. The Bulls had to move in another direction, but part of me wishes there would have been a way to make it work. But let's talk about it further in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I've probably said this before, but when the Bulls signed DeMar DeRozan in that sign and trade deal back in 2021, I wasn't that high on the signing. But because the Bulls were making all these other moves and signing Lonzo, Caruso, they were positioning themselves to start winning now, and it was all exciting and fun and different. And so even though I thought it was a lot to sign a 31-year-old player who, in my view, had been looking like he was maybe declining a bit, giving him that big of a contract when no other team was willing to give him that type of deal and trading a future first-round pick to get him, yeah, I thought it was a bit of a stretch. But because the Bulls were making big moves, bold moves, I could live with it. And while we're all kind of regretting it now by the Bulls sending the Spurs that pick in 2025, top 10 protected, you also can't deny that DeMar exceeded expectations and outplayed that contract with the Bulls. The team results may not have been there, but DeMar willed this team to so many wins during his 3 seasons with the Bulls, and above all, was there for the younger guys in building them up and helping with their development, namely guys like Ayo and Coby White. Now, I'll admit, I have not read DeMar's new book. I will be buying it. I will be reading it. But based on some of his discussions and his guest performances on Paul George's podcast and ESPN's First Take, you're seeing DeMar finally talk about his time in Chicago and all the things he's saying. It really makes it clear, to me anyway, that we probably took this guy a bit for granted. You heard him talk about in his discussion with Paul George on what ifs in Chicago and how he wanted so badly for that team to succeed. How he was so close to all the guys and how he wanted to be a part of their growth and success, the growth and success of the young players. He wanted to be there to continue to watch them grow and develop, how he busted his ass every night regardless of the situation and circumstances with the team given all their injuries, talking about the relationship, friendship, and bond that he had with all the players, and yes, even including Zach Lavine. Hell, even on First Take, he was talking about what a great guy Billy Donovan was, what a great and underrated coach he is. He was so well liked, so well respected around the organization, and the reason I say all this is it really is a shame, because I'm sure a lot of Bulls fans are like, well, whatever, get over it, it was time to move on. Man, it didn't really have to be that way. If anything, DeMar is the exact kind of player you want on your roster in the locker room and a veteran voice during a youth movement. Not only because he's a great veteran leader, but he actually loves being in that role. He loves being a mentor. He channels his inner Kobe Bryant, who was so close to him before he passed, and pushing the guys harder to become the best version of themselves. And he has no problem taking a back seat to build those guys up. Like, if there is one thing that differentiates DeMar from a lot of other stars in the NBA today, is he is more concerned about his teammates and their success than he is with his own. Not saying he doesn't care about himself and that he's just a completely selfless player. No, he still makes sure that he gets his, he still wants to get paid, but I would argue his team success is more valuable to him than his own. And you hear that in the way he speaks about his teammates to the media and less about himself and what he's doing on the court. Look, I know it wouldn't have made sense. It wouldn't have worked for the Bulls long term, and it likely would have set them back even further had they kept DeMar. But DeMar literally is the perfect veteran to have on your roster in a youth movement, because not only is he going to have the presence of mind and awareness of him being in that role, but he's still good enough to actually be impactful on the court. This isn't like a Udonis Haslem type player that is just going to be that veteran voice on the end of the bench every night and never actually see the floor. I talked about this before, but I liken it to the initial rebuild after the Bulls traded Jimmy Butler, they waived Rondo and bought out Wade. The new guys, the young guys they put together had talent, but they were void of any kind of veteran leadership until Thad Young came along. And because of their lack of leadership and experience, their development was impacted. That and having a lousy coach. They didn't know how to close out games. They would often lose their composure. It's very similar to what you see of the Detroit Pistons right now. Loads of young talent, great players with a lot of potential, but they have no voices in the locker room that are going to keep them grounded, help them learn, and mentor them throughout their NBA journey. They do now, I guess, as the Pistons saw some value in bringing in a few vets this offseason, but people ask, how could the Pistons still be this bad with the amount of young talent they have? It's leadership. Every young team needs that strong, savvy veteran leader. Now, I say all this, and also similar to the situation with Alex Caruso, you also don't want that for DeMar, for them to be part of a youth movement instead of being in a position where they can contend for a title. DeMar deserves to be in a place where he has a chance to win, especially at this stage in his career. But I do think that had the Bulls been able to find a trade for Zach LaVine early in the offseason, like around the draft or shortly before it, DeMar would still be on this squad. Financially, they would have been able to make it work by trading Zach LaVine. From a roster construction standpoint, they could have made it work better. And even though DeMar wouldn't have fit the timeline for the Bulls, even just having him on a short 2-year deal would have put the Bulls in a position to have DeMar be the leader on the court to help with the youth movement and development period to get the young guys to be in a better place where they are going to be ready by the time DeMar leaves. But obviously, with the Bulls being unable to find a trade for Zach LaVine, they were forced into a situation where they simply could not re-sign DeMar and put themselves over the luxury tax for being a play-in team. Just wouldn't have been possible. I'm obviously happy for DeMar now that he gets to be on a team that is going to put himself in a position to win. But yeah, part of me wishes the Bulls could have made it work, where DeMar is the sole veteran in this new youth movement direction the Bulls have taken. I know some will say, well, he would have stalled the development of the young players like he did with Patrick Williams. I don't really buy that. Yes, DeMar, for his flaws in slowing down the overall offense and the ball sticking to his hands a lot instead of getting other guys involved, he's very much a team player and will do what's best for the team and what's asked of him. Hell, he did that in San Antonio and taking more of a back seat and becoming more of a facilitator than a scorer. Because the Bulls were trying to win now, DeMar was given the green light and having a very different role of being the primary ball handler on most nights and the #1 scoring option. His role would have been a lot different in a youth movement going into the season, and knowing his character, how mature he is as a player and person, I believe he would have taken on that role for the betterment of the team. Doesn't really matter though, none of it was meant to be, as is the life in being a Bulls fan. But we certainly will miss DeMar, and we'll soon realize that as the season gets underway and we no longer see him out there in a Bulls uniform. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.